Good Chodesh, everyone. We're starting a new mimer. Due to the fact that there's so many good quality shiurim on the bus of the Gani Maimarim that are for this year from Tafshin Chavav and 1966 and 86. I'm going to leave it to the experts to teach them bus of the Gani. So we're going to learn a mimer on Boy Pesach, because of course Boy is connected to Pesach. This is a mimer that was said the second night of Pesach, in the year Tafshin Yud Zayin 1957. Make sure we're live here. Hold on. Okay. So the Rebbe says like this. The Maamar is Vayehi BeChatzi HaLaila. This is going on the time of the redemption. So it says BeChatzi HaLaila at the midnight. Vayehi Kol B'chor. That's the death, the last of the 10 plagues. The plague of Makas B'chores. Today's learning is in honor of Refuah Shalema from my dear friend Pinchas Daniel by Miriam. May Hashem bless him with Refuah Shalema, Nisim Geluim, reveal the miracles. So the pasuk says that at midnight, Chatzi Laila, Hika Kol B'chor. That's when the plague of the 10 plague, the last of the 10 plagues, the plague of the death of the firstborn. Isa Medrash, the Medrash teaches the Chol Makom Shenemer V'Havaya, says Vayehi BeChatzi HaLaila V'Havaya, and God, what's V'Havaya? Like and, what's the and? The V'On means who Bezdini, Hashem and His court, means the heavenly court. Meaning, what does it mean, Hashem and His heavenly court? V'Hainu Sheyesh B'Zeh Midas HaRachman is what's represented by the Shem Havaya, which is the name of Rachmim, like we learned this morning. Shem Havaya is Tferes, so that's compassion. Umidas Adin together, and the midah, the attribute of judgment, which is represented by Beis Dinoi, because Beis Din is the house of judgment. So why is the last of the 10 plagues coming from Behavai, which means Midas HaRachmim together with Midas Adin? Midas HaRachmim, the attribute of compassion, with the attribute of judgment. The kivan, because there was two things that needed to be accomplished. I don't know if this mimer is based on that, but in the Torah's Chaim of this week, the first mimer is based on this idea. So the reason is that the kivan shahut rechlias lamata naguf l'mitzrayim v'reif l'Yisrael. Two things had happened during Makas B'chores. One was naguf, the magefa, the plague for the Egyptians, and a healing for the Jewish people. Naguf, so therefore the plague comes from the idea of the midas adin, bezdinoi, from the attribute of judgment. The refuah and the healing is misad midas rachim, comes from the attribute of compassion. And because there's two things that were happening simultaneously, one was the plague for the Egyptians, and the second was the healing for the Jewish people. So therefore, there had to be from both sides representation, the idea of midas rachmim, which is the compassion, which brings the healing, which is from the Shem Havai Yud Gei Vav Gei, and Beis Dinai, God, so to say, court that brings the judgment upon the Egyptians. And that's why this plague happens at midnight, right in the middle of the night. Why? What does it mean, Chatzois HaLaila? In Yonai, L'chaber Beis Chatzi HaLaila. The idea is that midnight has the ability to connect both sides of the night, the first half of the night to the second half of the night. And exactly at midnight, it's a combination of the two. Chatzi HaLaila Rishon, which has the first part of the night, Shekodim Chatzois, which is before, so to say, midnight, the Chatzi HaLaila, and the second half of the night, which is after Chatzois, after midnight. And at midnight exactly, Chatzois is when is the combination of the two. What's the difference between the first half of the night and second half of the night? Here the Rebbe says an amazing thing. That Chatzi HaLaila Rishon, the first part of the night, is gevurah, is the attribute of judgment. Chatzi HaLaila Sheni, in the second attribute of the second half of the night, is chasadim, is kindness, is from the attribute of chesed. Therefore, we see that in the direction of towards, if you're looking at midnight as the center point. So Chatzi HaLaila Rishon, Shlachin and Run, therefore we see Chatzi HaLaila Rishon, the first part of the night. As we're getting closer to midnight, if the center point is midnight, so the closer we get to midnight, the darker it gets. It's getting darker and darker from the beginning of night till midnight. The Rebbe says in Yiddish, es wird als finsterer, it becomes darker. Unfinsterer, more dark. The Yaisa begins gevurah because that's gevurah. Gevurah is getting darker and darker, contraction, more judgment as we head towards midnight. Ubachatzi Laila Sheni, and the second part of the night, which is from midnight towards daybreak, Hakol the whole rega, every moment of the night further from midnight towards the morning, we get closer to the light. It's closer to the morning. Or therefore there's more light. Every second is closer to the light. Now, of course, we're not getting into the details that right before daybreak is the darkest part of the night that gets brought down. That's why the Chevle Mashiach and right before they left Egypt was very difficult because there's that intense darkness before the light. But the point is that you're heading towards light. It's very alt lichtiker. It gets more light and lichtiker more light. What's midnight? Chatzos, the midpoint of the evening, is how you can connect the two. That means that you have the end of the gevurah, which is the first half of the night, with the beginning of chesed. And midnight is not it's not the time that you transfer from point A to point B, but it has within it both. And that's why when Makas B'chayris, which was also a combination of Havayu, Beis Dinoi, Rachmim, and Din, it happens at midnight because that's where the attributes come together. As they are at night, means there's the morning that has a half the day, right? There's the midpoint of the morning of the day, there's midpoint of the evening. There's chatzos of Vayehi BeChatzi HaLaila. By Yom Hahu is the idea of day, which is light, but who is hidden. Yom Hazeh is double revelation. And that's why in Purim he says, Valayla Hahu, it was both dark, and Hahu was also just that night, that Laila Hazeh, this night. And then that point is the height of the darkness comes the miracle of Achashverosh. So he says, the idea of chatzos is to combine the 2 points of night, meaning to combine chesed and gevurah the way they are at night, which means Sfiras HaMalchus. When he says Sfiras HaMalchus, the attribute of royalty, of kingship, which we're going to explain in detail what that means. And it's incidentally, a lot of the ideas that are discussed in this complicated Maamar, it's not such a simple Maamar, is the foundation of this year's Farbrengen of Tafshin Chavot for Shvat and into the Maamar, the idea of the Maamar advocates the Matamata of Tachlis, that the power of higher than both of them is how you have the highest point and the lowest point. With the Rebbe's whole Farbrengen is about this idea being, how the Friedrich Rebbe was demanding the highest level of avodah, at the same time asking for a person to deal with the most simplest things of Aleph base. So that's similar. We're going to see this idea of the combination of 2 ideas and why it goes specifically to the attribute of Malchus. That's what he's going to discuss of royalty. Why royalty specifically is the attribute where there's that combination of chesed and gevurah at night. It says first of Malchus at night. So I want to say 2 points. Point number 1 is there's a sefer called Vayehi Yerushalayim. Vayehi Yerushalayim is a sefer, at least the version that I have, which is I took from my great grandfather, which was that the second part of the first part of the Sefer Vayehi Yerushalayim is letters, starting from letters from the Baal Shem Tov till the letters of the Friedrich Rebbe. Actually, one of the letters that the Rebbe talks about in Shvat is in that Sefer. And the second part is ideas of Chassidus, Maamarim. So in one of the letters, he has all kind of fascinating letters in the beginning of Vayehi Yerushalayim, especially from the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid and the early years of the Alter Rebbe. There's a letter of the daughter of the Baal Shem Tov, Odel, that she writes to Tzaddik, I forget the name of it, I'm not sure if it's Moshe Leib Sossever. She writes a letter about her father, and he wanted to know information about her father, the Holy Baal Shem Tov. So she said certain minhagim of the Baal Shem Tov. By next class, I was going to take a picture of the letter and post it so we could see it together, but I'll do it mitzvah next week. next class tomorrow. So he says that she says that my father, one of the customs she speaks about was that unlike most tzaddikim that sleep in the first part of the night and then wake up for taking chatzos and learn the rest of the night, the Baal Shem Tov was up the whole first part of the night and slept the night. Means he would go to sleep after chatzos till the morning. He says that Baal Shem Tov would wake up at 7:00. That's what the letter says. Now so she asked her father, what's with Tikkun Chatzos? The idea of Tikkun Chatzos is that you should wake up midnight and learn until the morning. So he says that she said, the Baal Shem Tov said to her, Adul, it's a good question, my daughter. But the second half of the night, which now we're calling chesed, that's already, he says, other tzaddikim dealt with that, to deal with the tikkun for the second half of the night. Tikkun of chesed at night, the tikkun of kindness, of lichtigkeit, of lighter. I'm here, the Rebbe Baal Shem Tov says, I was here to deal with the first half of the night, which is a deep idea that could be a long discussion on its own. But we see the first part of the night is the idea of gevurah. All right, let's back to the text. Vayehi Rebbe says, Chibur Beis HaKavim, how do we combine it? So we're saying that midnight, because the Maamar Text says two different focuses. One is the plague for the Egyptians, and the second part is the refuah, the healing for the Jewish people. So therefore, it needed to be Rachum and Din, Havai and Beis Dinoi, and then the Maamar of Torah had Torah's Chaim from the Rebbe. The Rebbe says it means seemingly the question is why is it a chibur of two kadm? If someone bothers your son, so you're upset at the person. So it's not just if someone's bothering your son, if someone's bothering the Jewish people, so you punish the person that's bothering your son. Why is that two opposites? So the Rebbe says that's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about that because he's sensitive to his son means Hashem Kadosh Baruch Hu is B'nai B'char Yisrael, right? So Hashem is close to is feeling the pain of the Jewish people if he's punishing the Egyptians, because that's a normal reaction. That's not a combination of two opposites. The combination of two opposites is where there's the din for the sake of the din, and nothing to do with that is the refuah for the child, not because the child is being tormented or was punished or was hurt by the Egyptian. Two separate things. The way the place is the same, because at the end of the day is that the marshal, either you're going to look at them, see it again in the lashon exactly, but either the punishment for the Egyptian is because it comes from the chesed that you have for your son, or you could say that the punishment comes from the punishment comes from din, but because it's a din out of chesed, because you love your son, you're punishing the Egyptian, not because the Egyptian has to be punished on his own. Here, the Rebbe is saying is that there's two separate ideas. There's the punishment of the Egyptians that's separate, and there's the healing for the Jewish people. Not that it's an outcome of the love for the Jewish people, an outcome for the judgment of the Egyptians. All right. So how do you have a combination of two energies? Is when you have this is the basis of this year's Basilgani and the Fabregna Tashin Chavvav is the idea that there's the Or Naila, the higher light that's beyond the separation that could combine the two things. That's the general rule, right? So where do we find that also? That idea where there's chesed and gevurah together. Rashi says clearly, it's a clear Rashi in Marcus Barad, right? Marcus Barad was Eish was fire with ice. Fire and ice is Eish Shemayim. Eish Shemayim is chesed and gevurah. What's Rashi say? That even though the fire, water should put out fire, chesed should put out gevurah. How do you have fire and water together? Because ice is Shalom B'Mrema. They make peace. Mechol and Gabriel, Eish and Mayim make peace to do Ratzon and Elyon. What does it mean to do Ratzon and Elyon? That's the or. That's the or. Means the light that's higher than both of them causes that there should be a combination of the two. There should be peace between the two. That Eish and Mayim can be together. Chesed and Gevurah can be together. B'hainu. Naturally, without a chiddush, it's not possible to have that you should have two opposites. Either you're one way or another way. Marshall, Rebbe talks about Torah and Torah, the idea of when a person is a person says a person is in a bad mood or an angry mood. So you remind that person that he or she is a Baal Chesed, a Baal Chesed, right? A person of Chesed. Why? Because by reminding that, it changes them out of that mode. and takes them out of the gevurah mode and puts them into the chesed mode. So that's what we have. That's the idea of a lot of the phrases. Why do we daven and we say to the Eibishter, Rachman, all these things? We're trying to get God into that mode. So, but to have two opposites running at the same time, that's not natural. It should be one of the two ways. Either you're in a chesed mode or you're in a gevurah mode. Or this is about a punishment for the Egyptians, or about the healing. It can't be healing and punishment simultaneously, two opposite things. Not the way that because you're healing, you're punishing, or because you're punishing, you're healing. They're two separate things. It means the Egyptians are not getting punished just because they hurt the Jewish people, which means it's not an expression of love for the Jewish people. It's din for the sake of din. They had to be punished. Simultaneously, they have love for the Jewish people. Have chesed and I'm rehealing. So how do we combine two opposite things? There has to be the Oiseh Shalom B'Rema. There has to be the light that's beyond the two, like in the Makas Bara. Vayehi BeChatzi HaLaila. That at that point they had, meaning so just ask the Klotz Kasha, right? So if you're saying that we already had a Makas Bara, the idea of chesed, mayim, and eish and mayim, but that was was doing two separate midos, seemingly. That was that the Maku was taking both parts simultaneously, the fire and the water. But here we're talking about like there's a rotzeh, there's a mode, there's a kavanah, there's how you're doing things. You're here to heal or you're here to punish. So Vayehi BeChatzi HaLaila, therefore it's at midnight. At that point there's the combination of chesed and gevurah. Why is it a combination? Because it's a light that's beyond the two. Maamar, like it says in the Zohar, the plukta laila, and half of the night, kuchabrichu asal ishtashta. God comes to, so to say, to get involved with the angels, meaning that Eibishter himself comes, and he's the koyach that has the ability to combine the two. The name Kuchabrichu itself is a combination of two things, Kadesh and Bara, separate and to bring down. What does that mean? It means to God to take pleasure is the attribute of Tiferes, and Tiferes is the attribute that combines the two. The have been higher than Tiferes, which Tiferes is the torso. Okay, so before we go a little further, we know that there's the goof, the way it is in Iskalulus, which is Chachma Bina Das, then into the Midos, where the chesed is the right side, and gevurah is the left side, and torso is Tiferes. So then you have Tiferes, which has the ability to combine, really connects really to Das, which combines. And Das goes to Keser. That's one way to look at it. But here he's saying that it's Tiferes. So the Mali is higher than Tiferes. It's the Gilui of Sfiris Abina. Bina means understanding. In this case, we see because it kind of goes back Bina to be on gevurah, because when you divide the three, Chachan, Chesed, Chachma, Chesed, Netzach, that's the right side. That's all Chesed. And then you have Bina, gevurah, and Hoid is the left side, is Tiferes, is gevurah. But here he's saying that the ability to combine is that Kuchabrichu Asalish Asha, which is at midnight, is Tiferes. Lamali is hard, and that is Gilei Sfiris Abina, which is understanding. Again, understanding gives space to comprehend. Lamali is Gilei Atik Shvebina. It's not just Bina itself, but it's the pleasure within Bina, means the higher level of Keser. Mitzad Gilei Or Nailazem, because of this light, Nasa his Skalulus, so there's the combination of Bezakabim, of the two sides of Chesed and Gevurah. We'll have to go back. The idea that Tiferes is a combination, we know. The idea that Atik could be a combination, Atik within Bina. So that's the Atik, the pleasure in Bina, which has space, so to say, to have these two ideas together. But again, in general, Bina is more towards the Gevurah side. If you can look at them as the Kavim of Chacham, Bina, Gevurah, and Hoyt. Adechem Gevurah, Bina, Hamashal. It's brought down, the idea that because they have fear, when they're in front of the king, then it's Oiseh Shalom B'Rema, that there's peace. The Rebbe brings this idea many times in Maamar, and we have it also in Mashal when we talk about you have a king with ministers. Right? So similar to the idea of chesed wars, you have different ministers. There's ministries with agendas, right? The finance minister has to take care of the finances of the country, and the defense minister has to defend the country. So not always does the budget allow for what the defense minister wants, and not always does the defense want to agree with what the finance has to say. So there's different agendas, and the king wants each one to maximize what they have to do. Each one has an office on their own. The hiskalalus has to come from a higher office. So when the ministers, the Rebbe brings this motion one time, so the names of finance and defense, but the idea, different ministers are different jobs. But when they come in front of the king, and they don't see their positions as separate, they only see the king and how they could serve the king. And therefore, that's the ability for scholars. Because then there can't be many opinions with many approaches. There has to be a mitzias. How are we going to serve the king? And therefore, the pachad, the fear that they have in front of the king, makes shalom. There's peace between the different ideas of chesed and gevurah, between Malach Michal and Malach Gabriel, of the angel of Michal, which represents the camp of chesed, and the angel of Gabriel, which represents the camp of gevurah. Like I said before, the idea of Mayim is chesed, which is we found it again in Barod, and Gabriel is the star of the master of Eish. They don't put each other out. The fire doesn't burn the water because enough fire, right, will evaporate the water. If this water is strong, we'll put out the fire. Because that is if you have a light that's above both of them, that they could both stay in existence. When you have two masters, here he says it right here. You have two ministers and ministries that have two opposite jobs. When you stand in front of the king, the king's revelation, and it's not just the king's revelation, but it's also what the king's office represents. There's no separation, there's no separate agendas. Of I have to take care of the finances while you have to take care of the defense of the country. The same thing for foreign office, right? The foreign office has their agenda, with the defense office has their agenda. The idea of asal comes to, so to say, take joy, so therefore it awakens this higher aura. Now, at midnight, it connects the chesed and gevurah, the way it is at night. He's going to see what that means for some of us. It means there's a dagosh here. It's not just that it happens to be at night. There's specifically a concept of chatzos at night, where the darkness kind of, when things are light, you go to a hotel, a lot of times you go to restaurants, the reason it's dark is not just because it's a setting, it's also it makes it easier to give off the impression of a nice place, but it's dark. You turn on the lights, someone looks a bit seedy and dirty, and you see everything for what it is. You go to a bar, you go to a restaurant, it's in the dark, you put a candle, and you put a nice tablecloth, that you don't see much more. It's not everything's revealed. So when you open the light, it doesn't look as nice. So in some places, and it's not a general rule, but you have the same thing over here. There's the idea of the night is kind of just getting through it without seeing everything. If you're going to see the chesed and gevurah separately, then it's a different kind of combination, where if there's a combination by night, we're going to learn this idea of ma'ivert. That's why God passes through. It passes through. There's an energy that wants to get in, and the night kind of conceals it without clearly showing the miracle of it, meaning the miracle of the combination of two ideas. So nasachiv v'skalas, which is the idea of the base in the way of night. It's going to be explained more detail later. And night means malchus, because again, malchus is not what's really inside. It's how it's a project. The definition of malchus is projection, whether it's in speech, communication, whether malchus is projection. It means you don't have to know everything what's behind or why. A king doesn't have to explain the why. This is what is. The malchus is more what is. The why, how did I come to this decision? That's not important. And we see that now recently. We see that now in what's in leadership, that the method that's being used in leadership is, on the contrary, not to give information. You'll know when I tell you, when I decide what we're going to do, we're going to do it. That's kind of a level of darkness that comes in malchus, the uncertainty, the unknown. But I'm the king and I decide how to do it. I'm the president, I decide how it's going to be done. And this method of combination, which is the combination of the method of night, is how we bring down simultaneously The concept of Nagul from Mitzrayim, of the plague on Egypt, on its focus as a plague, and same time, Refuah Yisrael, both of them together, this is what's happening. Shizel Mitzad Gili or again, where does it come from? The ability to combine two seemingly opposite ideas is from the idea that there's a Gili or B'Yoser, high light that is higher than the restrictions of each one of them. Higher, and higher, because like he said, first, Bina, Atik of Bina, that is able to combine the two. Stop here, there's talking about, just to finish over here, just finish the words, there's a story of it's just 6 pages, so we could do it over 3 days. There's a story of the holy chesed of Lublin. There was once a person who was passing through a hotel, and I think it was either the chesed or was the chesed's watch. I think it was the chesed's watch. The holy chesed of Lublin, that his clock didn't tell how much time has passed since creation. That's what clock tells. Clock every minute is a minute further from creation. It's 2:00 in the afternoon now, plus yesterday, plus the week before, plus the month and the year before, plus the decade before, then, and 100 years and 1,000 years before. We're holding now at this time. So most clocks are taking us away from the creation. Like the Rebbe says, that's going deeper into the darkness. The Chayz's clock is telling us how much closer we are to Mashiach, or another minute closer to Mashiach, or another second closer to Mashiach. The question is how you're counting. Baal Shem Tov says he came to me Masakin, the perspective of getting darker, the place where people are getting darker, where it could get too dark. Baal Shem Tov said he's coming to fix the first half of the night. All right, Yom Tov, Chodesh Tov, B'ez Hashem, we'll go further tomorrow in the class. I hope I'll be able to bring a copy of that letter from Adel about her father. Good Chodesh.